She handed me rules to see my grandson. Smiled like she'd already won. But I had an envelope full of signatures, transfers, silence agreements. At dinner, I asked one question. Should I explain, or will you? That's when her confidence cracked. My name is Daniel, and I will never forget the sound that paper made when she slid it across my kitchen table. It wasn't loud, just a soft, dry scrape, but it felt like a blade. The smell of cinnamon from the apple pie I'd baked still hung in the air, my grandson's favorite. I had flour on my hands, my apron still tied around my waist. She didn't sit down. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, stood at the head of the table like she was presenting a business proposal. "Before you see Oliver again," she said, smoothing her hair behind her ear, "there are a few boundaries." Boundaries. That word used to mean respect. Now it sounded like a lock clicking shut. I wiped my hands slowly, took off the apron, folded it neatly, bought myself time. I remember noticing the tiny gold bracelet on her wrist, the one I paid for when they couldn't afford their first anniversary gift. She didn't look nervous. She looked prepared. The paper was titled in bold, Grandparent Visitation Rules. Rule number 1. Visits must be pre-approved 72 hours in advance. Rule number 2. No unsupervised time. Rule number 3. No discussing family history or old values. Rule number 4. No gifts without parental review. Rule number 5. Failure to comply will result in suspended access. Suspended access. To my grandson. My blood. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Across the room, my son Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed, silent. He wouldn't look at me. I raised him alone after his mother passed. I worked double shifts, packed his lunches, sat in freezing bleachers at football games, held him the night he cried after his first heartbreak. And now, he couldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa finally sat down. "We just want what's best for Oliver," she said, her voice light, polished, almost sweet. "Consistency is important." Consistency? Like I hadn't been the only consistent thing in my son's entire life. I read the last line again. Failure to comply will result in suspended access. I looked up at her. She smiled. She thought she'd already won. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't about boundaries. This was about control. I folded the paper carefully, very carefully, because I've learned something over the years. The louder someone tries to make you feel small, the more afraid they are of what you know. I stood up slowly and walked to the drawer beside the fridge. Inside was a manila envelope, thick, sealed. I had prepared it weeks ago, because this wasn't the first time she'd tested the limits. I walked back to the table and placed it gently in front of my son. The paper made that same soft scraping sound. "I'll read your rules," I said calmly. Then I looked directly at Ethan. "And you can read that." Silence fell into the room like heavy snow. He stared at the envelope. Vanessa frowned. "What's that?" she asked. I smiled politely. "Oh," I said, my voice steady, "just some consistency." And for the first time that afternoon, she blinked. Because she didn't know, but she was about to.
If you enjoy the video, please subscribe. 2 nights later, we were all gathered at my sister Margaret's birthday dinner. 14 people around one long oak table, candles flickering, silverware clinking, laughter rising and falling like waves. Vanessa chose that night carefully. She waited until dessert, until everyone was watching. She stood up, wine glass in hand. "I just want to say," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room, "that setting boundaries in families is hard, especially when older generations don't always understand modern parenting." A few awkward chuckles. My cousin stopped chewing. My sister froze mid-pour. Vanessa continued. We've created a structured visitation plan for Oliver to make sure he grows up with healthy influences. Healthy influences. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Everyone did. I felt the weight of their eyes, the question in them. What did he do? She took a sip of wine. We just think it's important to limit outdated views and ensure emotional safety. Outdated views? Emotional safety? I folded my napkin. Carefully. Because I've learned something else too. When someone tries to shame you publicly, they expect you to defend yourself emotionally. They never expect you to defend yourself with facts. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He still hadn't spoken. Vanessa smiled again. Confident, polished, certain. She believed she had already framed the story. I cleared my throat. The room quieted. Vanessa, I said softly, would you like me to explain the rest? She tilted her head. I'm not sure what you mean. I nodded slowly. Then I reached into my jacket and pulled out another envelope. The same one. I placed it on the table between the candles. Should I tell them, I asked evenly, or would you prefer to? The air changed. It's hard to describe that moment. It was like a window opened in a room that had been suffocating. Vanessa's smile faltered. I have no idea what you're implying, she said, her tone sharper now. I looked at Ethan. Son, I said gently, open it. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Paper slid out. Copies. Bank transfers. Receipts. The down payment for their house. My signature. Not theirs. A private agreement Vanessa had asked me to sign 6 months ago, promising I would never disclose that I funded 70% of their home purchase, in exchange for continued access to the child. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Absolute. I spoke calmly. You see, I said, when Oliver was born, they couldn't qualify for the mortgage alone, so I helped. Margaret gasped softly. Vanessa's face drained of color. I never asked for control, I continued. I asked for one thing. I paused. Respect. That's the line. That's always been the line. I never asked for control, I repeated quietly. Only respect. Vanessa's chair scraped against the floor. This is manipulative, she snapped. You're weaponizing money. I looked at her evenly. No, I said. I'm protecting myself from being erased. I turned to Ethan. Page 4, I said gently. He swallowed, read silently, then out loud. If grandparents are deemed emotionally harmful, financial assistance may be reconsidered. His voice cracked. Vanessa stood up abruptly. That clause was standard. No, I interrupted softly. It wasn't. Aunt Margaret leaned forward. You made him sign a silence agreement? She asked Vanessa. No answer. The room had shifted. I could feel it. The narrative she'd built was unraveling thread by thread, and she knew it. Her confidence cracked like thin ice. I did everything for this family, she said, desperation creeping in. We just wanted stability. And I gave it to you, I replied calmly. I leaned back in my chair. You tried to hand me rules, but you forgot something. I let the silence stretch. You can't rewrite history when someone kept the receipts. Vanessa's hands were shaking now. Ethan looked like a man waking from a dream or a nightmare. The candles flickered, and for the first time that night, no one was looking at me like the problem. They were looking at her.
3 weeks later, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Ethan came alone. No Vanessa, no Oliver, just him. He looked smaller somehow, tired. I didn't know, he said the moment I opened the door. His voice wasn't defensive anymore. It was ashamed. We sat at the same kitchen table where the rules had first been placed. He held the original document in his hands. I let her handle everything, he admitted. The mortgage, the paperwork, I trusted her. Trust is a powerful thing.
so is silence. "I should have spoken up," he said. "Yes," I agreed gently. "You should have." He stared at the table. "She filed for mediation," he said quietly, "over custody." I nodded. "I know, because I had anticipated that too." Inside my cabinet was a copy of every transfer, every agreement, every message where she leveraged my access to Oliver as negotiation currency. When the mediator reviewed the documents, one thing became clear. Vanessa had attempted to financially coerce extended family relationships. That doesn't sit well in court, especially not when documented. The mediator called it concerning behavior. Ethan got primary decision-making authority. The house? Legally structured under a repayment agreement I never enforced, until now. Vanessa moved out 2 months later. There was no dramatic explosion, just consequences. Quiet, inevitable, real. And the first Sunday I was allowed to take Oliver to the park alone again, he ran into my arms. No supervision, no clipboard, just laughter, the smell of cut grass, the warmth of sunlight, the sticky sweetness of melted ice cream on his hands. I knelt down and held him close, because in the end, this was never about control. It was about dignity. I think about that list sometimes. The rules, the threats, the humiliation, and I remember the line that carried me through all of it. I never asked for control, only respect. That's all most of us ever want. Respect for what we built, respect for what we gave, respect for who we are. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't require shouting. Sometimes it just requires an envelope. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more real stories about standing up for yourself.